The Westlake Plaza Mall buzzed with the usual weekend crowd. Shoppers darted between luxury stores, teenagers huddled around food court tables, and in the central atrium, a gleaming black grand piano sat waiting for anyone brave enough to play. 13-year-old Jamal Washington adjusted the sleeves of his slightly oversized hoodie and glanced nervously at the imposing instrument. His mother had dropped him off an hour early for their lunch date so he could practice. That's what he told her, at least. In reality, Jamal craved an audience beyond the walls of his cramped apartment where neighbors complained about the electronic keyboard his grandmother had saved for months to buy him. "You sure you're allowed to touch that, kid?" A security guard approached, eyebrow raised. Jamal pulled out the mall's community piano program flyer he'd grabbed last week. "It says anyone can play between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., sir." The guard, whose name tag read Thomas, scanned the paper and nodded. "All right, then. Just don't bang on it like it's a toy, you hear." With a respectful nod, Jamal sat down on the bench, his fingers hovering over the keys. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began to play. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated through the atrium. Soft, delicate, precise. The casual chatter around him gradually faded as shoppers slowed their pace, glancing toward the source of the unexpected beauty interrupting their consumerist trance. Among those who stopped was Vanessa Rivera, 36, clutching sheet music for her afternoon piano students. She leaned against a pillar, coffee forgotten in her hand, watching the young boy's fingers dance across the keys with a fluidity that took most of her adult students years to develop. "My God," she whispered to herself. "Who taught this child?" On the opposite side of the atrium, Harrison Caldwell, 42, strode purposefully through the main entrance, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. The corporate attorney's day was already exceptional. He just secured a 7-figure settlement for a pharmaceutical client, earning himself a guaranteed partnership track. His tailored suit and monogram briefcase projected exactly the image he'd cultivated over decades: success, privilege, and power. Harrison was cutting through the mall to meet his driver when the music registered. He paused, appreciating the familiar melody, and found himself drawn toward the piano. A small crowd had gathered, and Harrison's tall frame allowed him to see over their heads to the performer. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. A black teenager in an oversized hoodie, worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers sat at the piano, worth more than most cars. The incongruity of the image, this child playing Debussy in the middle of an upscale shopping mall, caused Harrison's lips to curl slightly. Jamal finished the piece with a gentle, fading final chord. The small crowd burst into enthusiastic applause, startling him. He hadn't realized so many people had stopped to listen. A warm flush of pride spread through his chest as he smiled shyly. "That was lovely," an elderly woman said, dropping a $5 bill into the tip jar the mall had placed beside the piano. "Thank you, ma'am," Jamal replied softly. As the crowd began to disperse, Harrison stepped forward, clapping slowly, deliberately. Something about the man's expression made Jamal's smile fade. "Interesting choice," Harrison said, his voice carrying the polished enunciation of someone accustomed to courtroom performances. "Debussy's popular with beginners. Simple enough for anyone to learn." Jamal blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you." Harrison laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "It wasn't a compliment, young man. I'm merely observing that you've chosen a piece that requires minimal technical skill, emotional. Yes, but any first-year piano student could master it." The remaining onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa Rivera gripped her coffee cup tighter, knuckles whitening. "I was just warming up, sir," Jamal said, his voice quieter now. "Warming up? For what?" Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Are you the entertainment they've hired? Because I have to say, the Westlake Plaza standards must be slipping." A flash of hurt crossed Jamal's face before his expression hardened into something more guarded. The transformation, from open, joyful performer to defensive teenager, was heartbreaking to witness. "I'm just practicing," Jamal said. "The sign says anyone can play." Harrison made a show of looking around the luxurious mall, at the Gucci and Louis Vuitton storefronts, the crystal chandeliers, the marble flooring. "Yes, well, anyone is quite broad, isn't it? I suppose technically it includes everyone, though I imagine they had a certain caliber of musician in mind." Two teenage girls nearby exchanged disgusted glances. One pulled out her phone and began recording discreetly. "I've been playing for 7 years," Jamal said, a hint of defiance creeping into his voice. My teacher says I'm advanced for my age. Harrison chuckled, the sound dripping with condescension. 7 whole years? And who is this teacher? Someone from your neighborhood. The emphasis on the last word carried unmistakable weight, and several onlookers inhaled sharply. Jamal's hands curled into fists on his lap. My teacher is Dr. Reynolds from the community center. Community center. How quaint. Harrison picked invisible lint from his sleeve. Tell me, have you ever played anything with actual complexity? Bach? Chopin? Or is Debussy the height of your capabilities? The question hung in the air, naked in its cruelty. The gathering crowd had grown again, people drawn to the mounting tension like witnesses to a car crash, horrified but unable to look away. Vanessa Rivera stepped forward, coffee abandoned on a nearby bench. Excuse me, but I can play Chopin, Jamal interrupted, his voice stronger now. I can play Bach too. Harrison's eyebrows rose in theatrical disbelief. Really? The boy from the community center can play Chopin? This I have to hear. He gestured grandly toward the piano. Please enlighten us all. Jamal hesitated, looking around at the faces watching him, some concerned, others curious, a few recording with phones partially hidden. For a moment, it seemed he might stand up and walk away, dignity intact but spirit wounded. Then Thomas, the security guard who had initially questioned him, gave an almost imperceptible nod from the edge of the crowd. It was small, a tiny gesture of solidarity, but Jamal caught it and straightened his shoulders. Fine, Jamal said, turning back to the keys. I'll play something else. Harrison smirked, moving to stand where he could watch Jamal's hands, clearly expecting to witness a humiliating failure. By all means, show us what they're teaching at the community center these days. Actually, Jamal said quietly, positioning his fingers, this is something my grandfather taught me before he died. He played in jazz clubs on the South Side for 40 years. Before Harrison could respond, Jamal launched into an improvised jazz interpretation of Bach's Prelude in C major that made several listeners gasp. The familiar classical structure remained intact, but Jamal infused it with syncopated rhythms and blue notes that transformed the piece into something entirely new yet recognizable, a perfect fusion of classical discipline and jazz freedom. Harrison's smug expression faltered. This was not the fumbling attempt he'd expected. The boy's technical skill was undeniable, his left hand maintaining Bach's rolling arpeggios, while his right hand added flourishes that spoke of a musical understanding far beyond rote learning. People who had been walking by stopped in their tracks. Phones emerged from pockets and purses. A circle 3 deep formed around the piano as Jamal, eyes closed now, lost himself in the music, his body swaying slightly with each chord progression. When he finished, the applause was immediate and thunderous. Someone whistled. An older man in the back shouted, "Bravo!" Jamal opened his eyes, momentarily disoriented by the response. Harrison stood frozen, his calculated intimidation strategy backfiring spectacularly. He cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. Thank you, Jamal said simply, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Sensing his advantage slipping, Harrison's expression hardened. A cute parlor trick, mixing genres like that. But it doesn't demonstrate true classical training. Anyone can add a few jazzy notes to a simple Bach piece. Let's see how you handle something with actual complexity. The crowd murmured disapprovingly. Harrison was not winning fans with his persistence, but he seemed beyond caring now, determined to put this boy in what he perceived as his proper place. Play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Harrison demanded. The real test of a pianist. Not the watered-down version, mind you. The full piece. A hush fell over the onlookers. Even those without musical knowledge could sense the escalation, the cruelty of the challenge. Vanessa Rivera finally pushed her way forward. That's completely inappropriate. That's a concert pianist piece. He's just a kid. Exactly my point, Harrison said, not bothering to look at her. He should stick to pieces appropriate for his level instead of pretending. I know that one, Jamal interrupted quietly. All eyes turned to him. You know, Chopin's First Ballade? Harrison asked incredulously. The actual piece, not some simplified arrangement? Jamal nodded, his expression unreadable. We can find out. The tension in the atrium was palpable as Jamal positioned his hands once more, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. What happened next would change everything. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor floated through the atrium like delicate ghosts. Jamal's touch was tentative at first, not from lack of skill, but from the emotional weight of the piece itself. The haunting melody built gradually, his fingers gaining confidence with each measure. Harrison Caldwell's smirk remained frozen on his face, eyes narrowed as he waited for the inevitable stumble, the technical passage too difficult for a child from a community center to master. The crowd held their collective breath, many recording the confrontation on their phones now, the circle around the piano growing tighter. As Jamal reached the first challenging run, Harrison leaned forward slightly, anticipation gleaming in his eyes. But the boy's fingers danced across the keys with astonishing precision, each note articulated perfectly despite the blistering tempo. The smirk on Harrison's face faltered, replaced by confusion, then disbelief. The piece progressed, building in intensity. Jamal's small frame seemed to grow at the piano, his posture transforming as he leaned into the more passionate passages. His face, previously guarded and defensive, opened into an expression of pure emotional surrender to the music. This was not mere technical proficiency, this was artistry. Vanessa Rivera watched with tears forming in her eyes. In 15 years of teaching piano, she had never witnessed such a seamless marriage of technical brilliance and emotional maturity in someone so young. The boy wasn't just playing the notes, he was telling Chopin's story, honoring the narrative arc of hope, longing, and tragedy embedded in the composition. The most difficult section approached, the coda with its thunderous octaves and lightning-fast arpeggios that challenged even seasoned concert pianists. Harrison's lips parted slightly, certain this would be where the charade ended. But Jamal attacked the passage with controlled ferocity, his small hands somehow spanning the required distances, his timing impeccable. When the final chord resonated through the mall, there was a moment of complete silence, the kind of reverent hush that follows truly transcendent performances. Then the applause erupted, not polite mall-appropriate clapping, but a standing ovation worthy of Carnegie Hall. Someone shouted, "Encore!" Others were wiping tears from their cheeks. Thomas, the security guard, applauded with unabashed enthusiasm, pride shining on his face as if Jamal were his own son. The teenagers who had been recording were already typing furiously on their phones, uploading the video with captions like, "Racist lawyer gets owned by piano prodigy," and "You won't believe what this kid can do." Harrison stood motionless, his calculated public humiliation backfiring spectacularly. His legal mind raced, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. Well, he finally managed, his voice noticeably less confident. That was adequate. "Obviously, you've had some training beyond what I assumed. My apologies for the misunderstanding." The weak attempt at recovery fell flat. Several people in the crowd openly scoffed. "Adequate?" An elderly gentleman with a cane stepped forward. "Young man, I was principal cellist with a Metropolitan Opera for 40 years, and that performance was extraordinary by any standard." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Harrison's cheeks flushed with embarrassment tinged with anger, an unfamiliar sensation for a man accustomed to commanding respect and deference. "Yes, well," Harrison straightened his already impeccable tie. "Still, I'd like to see some credentials. Anyone can learn to play a piece through rote memorization. Where did you study? Who certified your training?" Jamal, still seated at the piano bench, looked down at his hands. The spotlight had always made him uncomfortable, and now dozens of faces were watching him, waiting for his response. The validation of his talent felt wonderful, but the confrontation was becoming overwhelming. "I just play," he said quietly. "My grandpa started teaching me when I was 6. Then Dr. Reynolds at the community center. I practice whenever I can." Harrison seized on this. "So no formal conservatory training? No accredited program?" "Just as I thought. He studies at Juilliard's pre-college division," came a voice from the back of the crowd. Heads turned as a distinguished black woman in her early 50s made her way forward. Dr. Elaine Winters, dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, carried herself with the quiet authority of someone used to being listened to. "Jamal is one of my Saturday students," she continued, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "He commutes 2 hours each way every weekend on a full merit scholarship." She turned to Jamal with a warm smile. "I came to surprise you before your lesson tomorrow. Your mother told me you might be practicing here." Harrison's face drained of color. "Juilliard? You teach at Juilliard?" Dr. Winters assessed Harrison coldly. "I'm the chair of the piano department." "And you are?" "Harrison Caldwell," he replied automatically, professional instinct engaging before his brain could intervene. Caldwell, Sternwood, and Price. Recognition flickered in Dr. Winter's eyes. The law firm? Interesting. Jamal looked up at his teacher, confusion evident. You know him, Dr. Winters? Not personally, she replied, her gaze still fixed on Harrison. But I'm familiar with his firm's reputation. Harrison cleared his throat, desperately trying to salvage the situation. Dr. Winters, this has all been a misunderstanding. I was simply testing the young man, challenging him to rise to his potential. In fact, I'm deeply impressed by his abilities. The transparent attempt at backpedaling drew scoffs from the crowd. Someone muttered, "Yeah, right." Vanessa Rivera, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped forward. That's not how it looked to any of us. You were deliberately trying to humiliate him because of how he looks and what you assumed about him. Absolutely not, Harrison protested, his lawyer persona fully engaged now. I would never. Race had nothing to do with my questions. I simply hold everyone to high standards, regardless of background. Really? Vanessa pressed. Would you have challenged a white child in expensive clothes the same way? Demanded their credentials after they proved their talent? Harrison's jaw tightened. I don't have to justify myself to you. This is ridiculous. He checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. I have an important meeting to attend. But as he turned to leave, Vanessa stepped into his path. Wait a minute. I recognize you now. She pulled out her phone and began searching for something. You were in the news recently. Harrison froze, his eyes darting between Vanessa and the exit. Many attorneys make the news, Miss Rivera. Vanessa Rivera. I teach music at Westlake Academy. She continued scrolling through her phone. Here it is. You're representing Brighton Conservatory in their discrimination lawsuit, aren't you? The crowd's attention, which had begun to drift after the performance ended, snapped back with renewed interest. Several people leaned in closer. Harrison's professional smile became strained. Client matters are confidential, Ms. Rivera. I couldn't possibly comment. It's not confidential when it's all over the papers, Vanessa retorted, turning her phone to show a news article with Harrison's photo. Brighton Conservatory, one of the most prestigious music schools in the country, is being sued for systematically rejecting qualified minority applicants while accepting less talented white students with family connections. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people connected the dots between Harrison's treatment of Jamal and his professional work. Dr. Winter's expression hardened. Yes, I'm quite familiar with that case. Several of my colleagues are serving as expert witnesses for the plaintiffs. Harrison's collar suddenly seemed too tight. The accusations against Brighton are completely unfounded. Their admission process is rigorous but fair, based solely on merit and potential. Merit and potential. Dr. Winters gestured toward Jamal. Like the kind you just tried to dismiss and diminish in this extraordinary young musician? Harrison's legal training kicked in, sensing the dangerous territory. I've already apologized for the misunderstanding. Now, if you'll excuse me. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Thomas the security guard interjected, surprising everyone. I watched the whole thing. You went after this kid deliberately, tried to make him look bad in front of everyone. His uniform, with its embroidered Westlake Plaza logo, lent his words official weight. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here. Harrison's face flushed with anger. Are you threatening me? Do you have any idea who I am? I think that's becoming increasingly clear to everyone, Dr. Winters said quietly. Jamal, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. It's okay. He can go. The simple dignity in the boy's voice drew all eyes back to him. I just wanted to play the piano. The statement, so straightforward and sincere, hung in the air like the final note of a perfect composition. Several people nodded approvingly. A woman near the back whispered, What a wonderful young man. Harrison seized the opportunity to extract himself. Yes, well, good day to you all. He adjusted his tie, attempted to reclaim some semblance of dignity, and strode toward the exit. But Vanessa wasn't quite finished. Mr. Caldwell, she called after him. One more thing. Harrison paused, visibly irritated. What now? I think you should know something about me. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm not just a music teacher at Westlake Academy. I'm also a judge for the National Young Musician Award. Harrison's expression remained blank for a moment before comprehension dawned. What did you say? The National Young Musician Award, Vanessa repeated. The one your daughter Eliza is competing in today. Preliminary round starts at 4 o'clock. She glanced at her watch. In about 3 hours. All color drained from Harrison's face. How did you? I reviewed all the applications personally, Vanessa explained. Eliza Caldwell, 15. Studying piano for 12 years. Her application mentioned her father is a prominent attorney who champions arts education. Harrison swallowed hard. Ms. Rivera, my daughter has worked incredibly hard. I'm sure she has, Vanessa interrupted. And she'll be judged fairly on her merit and potential. Just like every other competitor. She paused meaningfully, including Jamal, who I believe is also performing today. Jamal looked up in surprise. You're a judge? I didn't know. We're not supposed to interact with competitors before the event, Vanessa explained kindly. But these are unusual circumstances. Harrison looked between Vanessa and Jamal, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. His daughter's music competition, the one he pulled strings to get her into, the one that could secure her spot at an elite conservatory, would be judged by a woman who had just witnessed him trying to humiliate another competitor. This is a conflict of interest, Harrison stammered. You clearly have a bias now. I'll have to report this to the competition board. By all means, Vanessa replied calmly. I'm sure they'd be interested in seeing the videos. She gestured to the numerous phones still recording. I count at least a dozen people who captured your entire interaction with Jamal. Should make for interesting viewing for the board members. Harrison's legal mind raced through scenarios, none of them favorable. If he reported Vanessa, the videos would surface. If the videos surfaced, his behavior would be exposed. If his behavior was exposed, the Brighton Conservatory case, his partnership track, his reputation, his daughter's dreams. For once in his professional life, Harrison Caldwell found himself utterly speechless. Dr. Winters checked her watch. Jamal, we should get going. I'd like to work with you on your competition piece before your performance today. Jamal nodded, carefully closing the piano lid with reverence. As he stood, several people approached to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. The elderly gentleman who'd identified himself as a former cellist pressed a business card into the boy's palm. Call me, he insisted. I have connections at Curtis Institute. They should hear you play. As Jamal gathered his backpack, Harrison remained frozen in place, watching his carefully constructed world beginning to unravel. The threads of privilege, power, and presumption that had always protected him now seemed dangerously frayed. And the worst was yet to come. 3 hours later, the Westlake Performing Arts Center hummed with nervous energy. Parents clutched programs while young musicians in formal attire paced backstage, running through pieces in their minds. Harrison Caldwell sat stiffly in the third row, phone buzzing incessantly. He'd been dodging calls from his law partners since videos from the mall began circulating online. Already, the clips had garnered thousands of views, with commenters identifying him by name and firm. Daddy, I can't concentrate with your phone going off, whispered Eliza, his 15-year-old daughter. Tall and poised in an expensive black dress, she projected confidence, though her fingers trembled slightly. This is the biggest competition of my life. Sorry, sweetheart. Harrison silenced his phone, forcing a smile. You're going to be brilliant. He hadn't told Eliza about the mall incident. How could he explain that he'd publicly humiliated her direct competition hours before they would perform for the same judges? That the video was spreading across social media like wildfire? That he'd compromised everything they'd worked for? The lights dimmed as the competition director welcomed the audience. Today's preliminary round features 20 exceptional young pianists competing for 3 finalist positions and a potential full scholarship to Brighton Conservatory. Harrison's stomach clenched at the mention of Brighton. The same school he was defending against discrimination charges was sponsoring this competition, a detail that now seemed catastrophically ironic. When the first performer was announced, Harrison barely registered the name. His mind raced through damage control scenarios until a familiar figure walked on stage. Jamal Washington. The boy had transformed. Gone was the oversized hoodie, replaced by a simple but elegant suit that fit his small frame perfectly. He approached the piano with quiet dignity, acknowledged the judges, including Vanessa Rivera, and took his seat. The piece Jamal performed wasn't Chopin or Bach, but Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, widely considered one of the most technically challenging pieces in the repertoire. His interpretation was flawless, combining technical precision with emotional depth that belied his 13 years. When he finished, the audience erupted in a standing ovation. Even the other competitors watched from the wings with undisguised awe. Eliza gripped her father's arm. "He's incredible," she whispered, admiration and dread mingling in her voice. "Dad, I don't think I can." "You'll be fine," Harrison insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "You've prepared for months." Several performers later, Eliza's name was called. She walked stiffly to the piano, her usual confidence visibly shaken. Harrison leaned forward, willing his daughter to succeed, to prove herself deserving despite his actions. Eliza's performance of Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 was technically proficient but mechanical. Where Jamal had played with his soul, Eliza played with her training, all technique, no heart. The audience applauded politely when she finished, a stark contrast to the thunderous response Jamal had received. As Eliza returned to her seat, tears threatening, Harrison's phone screen lit up with a message from his senior partner. "Emergency firm meeting. 9 a.m. tomorrow." Explain this. Attached was a link to the mall video, now with over 100,000 views. The final blow came during the judge's deliberation. Harrison overheard two parents behind him discussing the viral video. "That's him, the racist lawyer who tried to humiliate the black pianist. Disgusting. And he's representing Brighton in that discrimination case." "Not anymore." The videos reached the school board. "They're dropping him as counsel." Harrison turned, face ashen. "Where did you hear that?" The woman held up her phone, displaying an email from Brighton Conservatory. "In light of recent events, we are severing ties with Caldwell, Sternwood, and Price. Our institution categorically condemns discrimination." When the judges returned, the competition director took the stage. "Before announcing our finalists, we have an unprecedented announcement. The Brighton Conservatory Board of Directors has contacted us regarding a significant change to today's awards." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "In addition to our planned scholarship, Brighton is establishing a new diversity in classical music initiative, providing full scholarships to 5 additional students from underrepresented backgrounds." Applause drowned out Harrison's ragged breathing. Furthermore, following concerning evidence of potential bias in their past selection processes, Brighton has requested that an independent panel review all rejected applications from minority students over the past 5 years. The irony was staggering. Harrison's law firm had been fighting to prevent exactly this outcome in court for months. When Jamal was announced as the competition winner, with Eliza failing to place among the finalists, Harrison couldn't even look at his devastated daughter. As they exited the hall, a security guard approached. "Mr. Caldwell, the directors would like a word." In a small conference room, Harrison faced Brighton's board members and competition judges, including Vanessa Rivera. "Mr. Caldwell," began the board chair, "in light of today's events, we're not only terminating your firm's services but filing an ethics complaint with the Bar Association." "You can't be serious," Harrison sputtered. "Over one misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding captured on video, showing our lead counsel exhibiting the exact discriminatory behavior we're being sued for," replied the chair coldly. "You've made our defense untenable and humiliated a child in the process," added Vanessa. As Harrison left, shell-shocked, he found Jamal and his mother waiting for their car. Before he could retreat, Dr. Winters approached with news that rendered him speechless. "Jamal, Brighton just offered you a full scholarship plus housing stipend. And they want you to perform at their donor gala, replacing the previously scheduled performer, Eliza Caldwell." Harrison watched his carefully constructed world collapse completely as his phone rang again, his managing partner calling to inform him of his immediate suspension from the firm. The universe had delivered its verdict with poetic precision. The man who sought to humiliate a talented black child for his own satisfaction had lost everything: his case, his reputation, his career prospects, and even his daughter's opportunity, while the boy he tried to diminish now stood poised for the future Harrison had tried to deny him. Karma, it seemed, played its own perfect composition.